Wow, you look stupid. Picture this. You open Sonic Frontiers for the first time. You don't really know what you're getting into, but it's a Sonic game, so it's probably not going to be very good. The first thing you see is... I thought I turned off the mod manager. In recent memory, the look of Sonic games has been really weird to me. Sonic games are known for their style, but as of recent, they haven't been living up to their reputation. Back in the 2000s, Sonic games were iconic because of their style and flair, and that was mainly helped by their visual style. But now they don't really have that, and I want to know why. So let's go back and find out why Sonic looks so weird now. But first, want to see something cool? Yeah. Starting very recently, I teamed up with fellow Sonic creators Average Burger Boy and Big Sleater to create a Sonic the Hedgehog community Discord server called the Empire City Metro. The server's pretty much done. We have a lot of really cool things in here, like places for you to self-promote, places to share your art, places to just chat about the funny Sonic. We have a bunch of roles for like all of the different countries in Sonic Unleashed. It's all really cool. If you are at all interested in joining, we'd highly appreciate it. The link is down in the description, so go ahead and click on it and have fun talking about whatever you guys talk about, like... Choose. Before we get to the incident that I would say started this whole thing, I want to go over some things. First, a lot of Sonic fans attribute Sonic looking weird now to Sonic's model, and personally, I have to disagree. While I also don't like how most of these renders look, it isn't a bad thing that they've kept this model relatively the same since 2007. It's a really well-made model despite posing with it sometimes looking off. I do feel that it could use some fine-tuning, but it doesn't need a complete makeover. The model can still look really good in some cases under the correct lighting and with the correct angling. Overall, the model is perfectly fine. Some renders with it look really bad, but the model itself can stay. However, I believe I know why people dislike this model, and I think we'll find out why pretty soon. The second thing I want to do before getting to the incident is look at a few examples as to how visual styles in Sonic games worked before. Unlike something like Super Mario, where each game has its own set art style that keeps things consistent, many Sonic games have their own unique art style, which help them stand out from each other, despite all having the same styled art on their box. Sonic Adventure 2, for instance, took place in a more Japanese animation-styled urban area modeled after San Francisco. It had realistic elements to it, but overall it was far more anime-like than what most were used to at the time. Thus, Sonic and his friends were modified to fit the game's style. Sonic specifically was changed to be far more humanoid, fitting with the game's aesthetic and the humans. He was lankier, skinnier, and his chest took more of a focus, puffing it up and increasing the size of his little stomach thing. This design is considered to be one of the greats in Sonic 3D modeling, and honestly, I can agree. There's a lot to love about this model, but it personally isn't one of my favorites. There are many other styles that I prefer for this one. Then there was Sonic Heroes, which went for more of a bright and cartoony style. More unnatural environments, exaggerated terrain, and varied colors. To go with that, the characters were also changed. Their colors were flatter, their texture was flatter, and Sonic's proportions in particular were modified to be more noodle-like. If that makes any sense. Heroes isn't really in the running of what people would consider the best style for Sonic, but I'd say it succeeded in what it set out to do. Next up is Sonic 06, which sought out to be somewhat of a reboot of the series, and that goes for its visual appearance as well. The game is set in a far more realistic setting. All of the humans are more akin to real life, and the locations are more down to earth. That same philosophy goes for Sonic and the gang too. Sonic was given a much more elongated and taller appearance. He was given longer quills, more emphasis was put on his chest, much like Sonic Adventure 2, and unlike most of the games beforehand, this also affected the box art. Gone were the 2D art pieces that stayed consistent from Sonic Adventure to Sonic Advance 3, and in with the same style the game itself went for. I personally am not a fan of this style at all. I'm not the biggest fan of Sonic being slapped into very realistic settings. Humans are fine, but I don't know, I just don't like this for whatever reason. Even if I like how they look or not, in all of these games, everyone looks like they belong in this world, and that's how it should be. And then Sonic Unleashed happened. This moment in 2008 is what I like to dub the Marza incident. Marza Animation Planet were the animators who worked on Sonic Unleashed and many of the games onward, and were one of the key factors people point to when talking about the game's visual style. That may seem like Marza's involvement was a bad thing, but that couldn't be further from the truth. No matter how you feel about Sonic Unleashed as a game, you can't deny how beautiful it looks. Even 15 years later, it's still up there as one of the most visually appealing Sonic games ever made. Unleashed was the first Sonic game to really go for that Pixar aesthetic, with the more cartoony characters and locations, with realistic lighting and materials. This is especially noticeable in the game's opening that you could literally gaslight people into believing is a Pixar film. Look, it's Remy the Rat! Since the game's style was changed from the previous ones, so too did the style of the characters. Sonic and Eggman in particular have a shiny finish to their coloring and have more realistic skin and fur, while still retaining their more cartoony proportions from games like Sonic Heroes. This, even today, is still considered the golden standard for Sonic's visual style, so, of course, Sega did it again in Sonic Colors. Colors keep the same general appearance as Unleashed and brought back Marza to do the promotional animation. The game overall, from cutscenes to gameplay, fits that Pixar aesthetic and keeps everything consistent. That factor that made each Sonic game stand out may be lost, but it really isn't that big of a deal when Sonic has a set style now and it looks really good. Then Sonic Generations released and took a bunch of old stages from previous games and reimagined them for the modern day. Since this was the era where Sega wanted to use the Marza style for everything, this means that we get to see all of these old stages in that style. Stages like City Escape, Seaside Hill, and Crisis City are completely redone and placed into this different style, and it's really cool to see. Generations is probably also up there with Unleashed as one of the best looking Sonic games, but this is where things start to go downhill. With the release of Sonic Lost World, Sega really wanted to take a different direction with Sonic, allowing him to appeal more to younger audiences on the system the game was releasing on, the Wii U. Many of the locations on the newly discovered planet, the Lost Hex, were very similar to locations from the recent Mario games, but had a unique blocky style to it, and the new villains, the Deadly Six, fit with that style. So, if the art style was changing, how was Sonic himself going to change? Is this photoshopped? You see, this is why I think Sonic looks so weird now. Since Sonic Lost World, they've continued to use the Marza Sonic model, despite the visual design of each game changing. Because of this, Sonic and the world he inhabits clash, making everything look like a weird Sonic fan game made in the Unreal Engine. And to me, nowhere is this more apparent than the game that it started in, Sonic Lost World, the game I literally just mentioned. Sonic Lost World's visuals are much more cartoony and sharp than Unleashed, Colors, and Generations' Marza aesthetic. However, Sonic's model is almost the exact same as it was in all of those previous games. Oh, sorry, his quills are shorter now. I wonder why they're protesting. This genuinely looks like a mod that slaps some random character into the game and expects it to look cohesive. Oh my. Well, if Sonic and the rest of the main cast look so garbage in this game, how would I fix it? Well, it's simple. Just make them more cartoony. Shorten the limbs, make him chubbier, sharpen his edges a bit, kind of like the Lost Hex environments. Heck, this game was seemingly supposed to be a classic Sonic game at some point in development. Maybe you could give him the classic design? I don't know, maybe that wouldn't work. I think changing Sonic's design to be more cartoony and sharp like the world he's exploring itself would just let things blend better. And Sega seemed to agree with me, since they would actually put that into practice with Sonic Runners, the mobile companion game for Sonic Lost World. Sonic had a shorter, stubbier body, a larger head, flatter colors, and a black outline to help him pop. Literally, this is exactly how Sonic should have looked like in Lost World. This is all they had to do. Well, now that Sega has relearned how to make Sonic fit into his environment, did they apply that to the console titles? Okay, look, hear me out. They actually kind of had something going here with Forces. Because the game's art style makes no dang sense. Like, okay, you have the Marza-styled Green Hill from Sonic Generations with very minor tweaks, which does actually help the model blend in a bit better than in Lost World, but then you have Sunset City that just has a few city structures that look like they would fit in something like Unleashed, and then it clashes with the terrain that looks like it was ripped out of Lost World. Do you see the problem here? Everything clashes. So when a stage actually looks like it fits with the character you're playing as, you know that later on, you're going to see something that just doesn't work. Really, you don't have to change how anybody looks in this game unless you want to fully change this game's visual style. And we know nobody wants to do that. And now we've entered the present day with the recently released Sonic Frontiers, a realistic, open-world Sonic game that was going to define the next decade of Sonic games. We were going to experience Sonic like never before. Wow, his fur is darker now. Sonic Frontiers, despite being another Sonic game that had an all-new direction visually, still uses Marza's Sonic model. Granted, he does have velvety textures now. And I'm trying to buy groceries from IKEA. Sonic feels like he doesn't belong. There's a reason why when this game was being promoted, people said it looked like a fan game or a mod. It's because it does. The only place I'd say this model looks fine in is cyberspace, and surprise, surprise, it is literally just the levels from Sonic Generations slapped into a new engine. Joy. I wouldn't say Sonic sticks out as much as he does in Lost World, however, he still definitely feels like he doesn't belong here. Fixing Sonic here is much more difficult than fixing his appearance in Lost World. The only thing that I can really think of is, I hate to say it, take cues from the Sonic 06 model. Giving Sonic longer proportions and focusing on the chest and more realistic materials would definitely allow him to fit here rather than sticking out. Now, I'm not saying dump this model into the game. No, not at all. I'm saying that taking specific elements from it can allow Sonic to blend in more. There are mods that do rip Sonic's model from 06, and it does look somewhat genuine. I don't think it's perfect whatsoever, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. You could do all these changes to Sonic's design, or you could just make the game not look like a Bethesda game. I'm just saying, Sega. So, how can we prevent this problem from happening in the future? Well, it's a really simple answer. Just have everything be coherent. By simply making the characters and the world around them feel like they benefit each other, you improve the overall experience of the game. They can change Sonic's design slightly for each game's style like what they did in the 2000s, or if they don't want to do all that work, they could stick with Mars's Pixar-inspired style. It's worked before, and it continued to work and improve upon itself until it could possibly get to a point where it could visually rival the pre-rendered cutscenes that are held in such high regard. If you want to have the box art and promotional material all stay consistent, that's perfectly fine. They've been doing that since Unleashed, and it has worked. But changing the look of the game itself would do wonders. So, Sonic looks weird now because Sega isn't putting him in the right environments and not changing him to fit in said environments. The answers as to how it can be fixed are so easy, but the people who overrun the Sonic branch at Sega just aren't putting in the work needed. Whether it's budget, time, or maybe even ignorance, a change needs to be made, and I know it can be. Will it though? Will Sonic Adventure 3 come out and have a Jet Set Radio looking environment yet still use the Sonic Lost World model? I mean, if it did, people would just complain that Sonic's fur isn't dark enough and leave it at that, so it probably doesn't matter.